The UK Chancellor announces a £1 billion grant for the hospitality sector in England. In Scotland, large-scale events, including mass New Year's celebrations, are cancelled and sport will be played behind closed doors for 3 weeks. The Omicron variant is making up nearly 3/4 of all new COVID cases in the US. President Biden will outline his response a little later, including 500 million free tests and some military medical help in January and February. Rescuers reaching islands in the Philippines cut off by last week's super typhoon have discovered scores more dead bodies and villages that have been totally flattened. The number of people killed has risen to more than 375. And the High Court in London has ordered the ruler of Dubai to pay more than $700 million in a divorce settlement to his ex-wife, Princess Haya of Jordan.
We begin in Japan, where the Prime Minister addressed the nation after the Diet wrapped up its latest session on Tuesday. Kishida Fumio says the government will continue its tougher border restrictions in response to the coronavirus Omicron variant.
The government will take preemptive measures to contain the new variants. People who have been in close contact with someone who has tested positive for the Omicron variant will be asked to stay at designated facilities for 14 days instead of quarantining at home.
The government has so far not allowed the entry of foreign nationals who aren't residents in principle. The measure was originally planned to last until the end of December, but Kishida now says it will be continued, although he did not mention an exact date. The government will decide on this after analyzing the situation. The Prime Minister says the government is ramping up a rollout of booster shots and is preparing to distribute oral COVID-19 drugs. Health authorities across the country reported about 250 new coronavirus cases on Tuesday. 2 people have died. The operator of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant says it aims to install facilities to release treated radioactive water into the sea around mid-April of 2023. The water will be diluted before its release so it meets national safety levels. Tokyo Electric Power Company has filed a plan with Japan's nuclear regulators. Water used to cool molten nuclear fuel at the plant mixes with rain and groundwater that flows into damaged reactor buildings, averaging a total of 140 tons a day. This water is treated to remove most radioactive material, but it still contains tritium. The treated water is then stored. The plant has about 1,000 tanks, which are now 90% full. The remainder is expected to reach capacity after autumn next year. Earlier this year, the Japanese government decided on the strategy of discharging treated water into the ocean after diluting it with seawater. In line with government policy, TEPCO began a drilling survey of the seabed last week to build an undersea tunnel for releasing the water from the facility. It wants to start construction work around June next year after getting the regulators' approval and local understanding. However, the company has been facing the challenge of figuring out how to ease persistent worries among local residents and others over the release. Experts say a massive megaquake off Japan's coast could claim nearly 200,000 lives. But the government panel says if measures are taken, those casualties can be dramatically reduced. Experts studied 2 deep-sea trenches. A massive earthquake along either one of them could trigger damaging tsunami waves. The Chishima Trench extends from what Russia calls the Kuril Islands to Hokkaido, and the Japan Trench runs south of Hokkaido along the eastern coast. This animation predicts the scope of a 9.1 magnitude quake along the Japan Trench. Experts say tsunami waves higher than 10 meters could reach parts of the Tohoku region and Hokkaido, causing widespread damage and killing 199,000 people. They also estimated the impact if a 9.3 magnitude quake strikes along the Chishima Trench. The panel says waves topping 20 meters would hit parts of Hokkaido, killing as many as 100,000 people. Death tolls are predicted to rise in winter when evacuees face the threat of hypothermia. But the panel says if shelters are properly prepared and people in risky areas move quickly, the number of deaths could drop by 80%. The Japanese government has decided to offer a $100 million aid package to Afghanistan amid a humanitarian crisis. The planned assistance is part of the supplementary budget enacted on Monday. This is Japan's second provision of assistance to the country since a takeover by the Taliban. The aid will be used to provide food and water as well as to help improve medical and hygiene conditions through 16 international organizations, including the UN World Food Program and UNICEF. The economy is in turmoil more than 4 months after the Taliban Islamist group took control of the country. 60% of the population does not have sufficient food. People are also facing drought, poverty, and the effects of the pandemic. Now to the devastating tornadoes that ripped through 6 U.S. states over a week ago. The governor of Kentucky says search operations for missing victims have ended in his state.
0 people missing, and now no active search or rescue operations.
Governor Andy Beshear said on Monday that 76 people died in the state as a result of the tornado outbreak, correcting the figure from the 77 previously reported. This brings the death toll to 90 in 5 of the 6 states hit by the tornadoes. The governor also said wide areas are still without power and about 900 people are being housed in facilities in state parks and other accommodations. He again pledged efforts for prompt recovery and continued support for survivors. The Omicron variant of the coronavirus is now the most common in the United States, showing up in more than 70% of the latest infections. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the strain made up 73% of newly reported cases last week. That's a nearly 6-fold increase from the week before. The nation's daily average for the week ending Saturday topped 127,000. Omicron now makes up more than 90% of infections in states where cases are surging. A county in Texas confirmed what's believed to be the first death of a person infected with the variant. The man was between the ages of 50 and 60. He had an underlying health condition and was not vaccinated. The White House says the government has no intention of locking down.
We are now at a very different place we were in a year ago. 200 million Americans are vaccinated now.
The Biden administration is instead promoting booster shots and trying to make it easier for people to access virus tests. Foreign ministers from the Group of 7 nations have sounded the alarm over Hong Kong's recent election. It's the first since electoral reforms were carried out under Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier this year. Media in the Chinese territory have reported that pro-Beijing candidates took all but 1 seat in the Legislative Council election on Sunday. The G7 foreign ministers issued a statement on Monday expressing grave concern over the erosion of Hong Kong's democracy. They said the changes to the electoral system undermine the territory's high degree of autonomy under the one country, two systems principle. They noted that the number of directly elected seats was reduced and said a new vetting process severely restricted the choice of candidates. The ministers called on authorities in China and Hong Kong to end what they called the unwarranted oppression of those who defend democratic freedom.